Hello Dev, welcome to the channel. In this video, we will learn about Java Servlets, a powerful tool for building dynamic web applications with Java. So what is Servlet? It is a Java-based server-side component that extends the functionality of a web server. It provides a powerful platform-independent way to build web applications in Java. It is part of the Java Enterprise Edition platform, and it is used to handle the request-response interaction for web applications. Servlet is nothing but a standard Java class that handles requests, processes them, and replies back to the client with a response. It is a server-side technology that runs on the Java-enabled web server. And what is a web server? It is typically described as software and hardware that uses HTTP to respond to client requests made over the internet. We can display website content through storing, processing, and delivering those web pages to users. Some web servers also support different protocols used for email, file transfer, and also storage. Some examples of web servers are Apache Tomcat, Microsoft IIS, Nginx, Glassfish, and so many others. As per the web container, also known as the servlet container, it is the component of a web server that interacts with the Java servlets. It handles the incoming requests from clients and manages the lifecycle of servlets. It also manages any other web services in that server. It can run multiple web applications where each application can have multiple servlets. When talking about client-server architecture, we typically talk about tiers. Let's talk about two-tier architecture. Tiers represent each side of the communication, and the communication happens via network protocols. Typically, in the two-tier, we have the presentation, business rules, and data access layers running on the client side, whereas on the other side, we have the database running separately. In this example, we see the client side on the left and the database server side on the right. The client hosts the Java application, which uses the JDBC to connect to the database server. Moving to the multi-tier architecture, we typically divide it into three pieces, or tiers, or layers. First, we have the presentation layer, implemented on the client side, which renders the HTML provided by the application server. The application or business tier creates the presentation content and implements the business logic on the application server. Lastly, we have the data tier, which implements data access logic on the application server and has the data stored in a database server. Now back to servlets. Here we have the servlet lifecycle defined. The servlet gets first invoked, loaded by the JVM, and instantiated using its constructor. It invokes the init method, which turns it into the initialized state, and invokes the service method, which processes the request. After it is finished, the destroy method gets invoked and destroys the servlet. Note that we have one step that if the servlet is already initialized and loaded, it bypasses the initial states and gets directly to the served state, as long as it was not destroyed. Now let's dive into the code. In NetBeans, let's go to File, New Project. Here we have Java with End. Let's go to Java Web, where you can see this web application. Hit Next, Web Application 1. I won't change the name for now. Next, it asks me for a server. So if you need to create a server, this screen will be slightly different. You can click Add, and it'll walk you through the steps for adding a server. We're going to use Apache Tomcat. Since I already have it configured, I will not do that now. Context path is the URL that takes us to the index.html file in our web project. If I hit Next, I could also select frameworks, but I'll just go Finish. When we create that sample project, in NetBeans by default, it creates the index.html for us. It's the basic structure for an HTML page. The name index.html is very important. It is located in the web pages folder, which gets loaded when we go to that URL that I showed earlier. Metainf has the context XML. If we want to change that URL, the home URL, we can definitely do that. Webinf, it's going to have our deployment descriptor, which has a configuration for our servlets. We'll see it in a sec. Source packages, it's empty because we have nothing yet. I will right click and run this web project. You can see down here in NetBeans, it is running. Okay, the output. So this is the output for the Tomcat and Tomcat EE logs. Okay, it asks for my Tomcat password. Okay, I already have it set up. And there you go. Pops up in the browser to do write content. Here you can see localhost, which is my machine, the port where Tomcat is running, then that context URL. Then you can see here to do write content. To add a servlet, I will go source packages, right click, new instead of go to a Java class, we have here servlet. If we don't, go to other and search for servlet. So servlet, what is the name of the servlet? I'll just leave it as new servlet package. Servlet package, I'll create one. Next, here we have add information to the deployment descriptor, web.xml. That a web.xml is going to have the configuration for our servlets. I will select this one. It will create that web.xml file here. Class name is the class name that it's given to the file. Servlet name, that's the servlet name, as the name implies. And URL pattern, how we access that servlet. Once I click finish, it redeploys the application automatically. This is the first servlet. Here we see that, again, nothing but a class, new servlet, but it extends from this HTTP servlet, which already defines all the behavior. NetBeans gives us, by default, these placeholders. So you can see this method here, process request for both HTTP GET and POST. How is it determined? A little bit down in the code. Before we dive into the specifics, I'll scroll down. NetBeans show this HTTP servlet methods collapsed. So let's click on the plus. And here we have the method doGet. Scroll a little bit more, doPost, and also this getServletInfo. DoGet is the convention for get methods in Java. So all the HTTP verbs are going to be do and the verb. So doGet, doPost. Note that those methods, they take two arguments. First one is HTTP servlet request, named request, and then HTTP servlet response, named response. So all requests made on the web browser are going to be wrapped into this request variable here of type HTTP servlet request. We process, we do whatever we need to do, go to the database or just render the HTML page, and we send back the response back to the client. So both doGet and doPost are invoking another method, which is process request, and we're passing the request and response arguments here. So if I control click process request, takes the HTTP servlet request and the HTTP servlet response. We also note a new exception, servlet exception. So if something goes wrong, we'll see an error message. That's where the console gets very helpful. It's going to have any error messages here or here. So this two tabs. So our process request method, what is it doing? It creates this print writer. So from the response, it gets this writer. And then from that print writer, we're printing all the HTML. So we are dynamically creating an HTML page. When I say dynamically, it means in runtime. So it means this is a Java class, this is a Java method. So we can have conditions, we can have if statements to create our page in a different way. So if I try to access this servlet through my browser, I should see this web page here. So it should be HTML head, there's going to be a title, but the body has just an H1 tag. I'll quickly show you the web.xml, which we talked about earlier. This is where the servlet is configured. So again, when you create a servlet, it creates this tag here, servlet, servlet name, then the servlet class. It's also important, the servlet mapping. So it takes the servlet name and assigns the URL, the one that we selected when we were creating the servlet. If you want to change the URL, you can do that here. So if I try to access /new servlet, I should be able to see this page. I will right-click Web Application 1 again and run. It pops up. It takes me to my server at this port, at this project or this application. And the URL we had was new servlet. And I hit enter. It takes me to that page with that H1. If I try to enter another page, servlet with a bunch of T's, I get a 404 not found because that servlet with this name here, more specifically this URL, doesn't exist. So I have to provide the proper one. This part here is being displayed from the request variable. So from the request, give me the context path. I'll quickly show you another example, which has a form this time. Open up this one. Here we have web pages. Note that we have more pages this time. So I will right click and run. Okay, pops up. So what do we have here? Localhost 8080, all the project name here. A simple form using get. First name Joe, last name Hacker. If I click submit, it changes the URL because when I submit the form, it redirected the application. So if I go back to You see, get form, which is the one that we accessed first. We have the form action that points to that URL, and that URL being the servlet URL. How do we find the servlet URL? Go to the web.inf, web.xml, and there you have, okay, so here I have this servlet with this name, sample form servlet. And in my servlet mapping, my servlet name here points to this URL. So when I try to access this URL from the browser, it goes to this servlet, it goes to the servlet list, and finds the class. So servlet form servlet. So in my sample form servlet. So if I go to source packages, go to that package, sample form servlet, here I have it. So process request, taking the HTTP servlet request and response, it's going to print an HTML page. So prints from the request get context path, and then I have a list of first name. So from my request, get the parameter first name. From the request, get me the parameter last name. If we go to the get form HTML file, which is an HTML file, in the input, what do we have here? The name of the parameter, first name. For the last name, it's the same thing. For the post, let's see if we spot the difference. It's very similar. In the form, we have the URL, which is the same URL, but the method is now post versus the other one. So the get has the method get. This is method post, has first name, has last name. So if I go to the browser, post form HTML, now it's using post, and I hit submit. There you go. What's the difference here? Post does not give me the query string parameters at the URL. So this was the brief introduction to servlets. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.